I want to talk today about miracles. You've heard the term used an awful lot. You've probably used the term a lot to describe something that fantastic that has happened in your life. You say, "Oh, it's a miracle that I got done with this task I had to do at work today," or it's a miracle that I haven't had a nervous breakdown after all the things that I've gone through recently. Well, we use that term a lot to describe, and so we bat it around and we don't think anything of it. So I want us just to focus in on a little bit today what a miracle is. And you remember back in 1980, there was a hockey game that was played between the United States Olympic hockey team and the Soviet team, and the Soviets were expected to win because they were the dominant team, and of course the Americans, out of pure perseverance, won that game, and went down in history as one of the greatest, probably the greatest hockey game in history. According to the Americans. Well, anyhow, there's a movie made about it, and it was called The Miracle on Ice. Well, let's talk about what a miracle really is. We can go into the dictionary, and it's described as a surprising and welcome event that is not explicable by nature or scientific law, and therefore considered to be a work of a divine agency. In other words, a miracle is something where the natural laws or the scientific laws are overcome, are violated, and something amazing happens that is extraordinary. Jesus walking on the water, that just doesn't, nobody can do that because water is of a nature where it cannot be walked upon unless it's below zero and it's frozen over with ice. We know that miracles, Jesus did many miracles, and they all involved where nature was overcome. Whether it was the healing of a blind man, where the eyes were not working, but Jesus healed them. Therefore, it went against science, went against nature. Let's look at the very first miracle of Jesus. Performed at a marriage feast in the community of Cana in Galilee. Jesus and his mother and probably his brothers were invited there for this wedding feast, and it was apparently a big deal. And what we see happen in that story is the unimaginable happened. They ran out of wine, and it was terrible for two reasons. First of all, it was disappointing to the guests who were there to have a good time and party and everything, but it was also unfortunate and embarrassing for the host who was hosting that party, because in those days, and even today, a host, that is the parents of the bride or the groom or whatever, they're supposed to have enough wealth and resources to be able to provide for all the wedding guests. And so to run out of wine in the middle of a feast like that is a regrettable situation. And so when Jesus found out about it, Jesus' mother, Mary, went to him and said to Jesus, they've run out of wine. Do something. And so Jesus fills a bunch of pitchers, or has a servant fill a bunch of pitchers with water. They had the water taken, the big old giant pitchers. They had them take them to the steward or the master of the wedding feast, and he took a taste of it. And he said, "Why did they save the best of the wine until the very end? This should have been used at first when people had their senses about them." And so this was the best wine imaginable. That's a miracle, because you cannot turn water into wine. You can turn fruit by fermenting it over a period of time. You can turn it into wine, but you cannot take simple water and turn it into wine. So that's the definition of a miracle, is when the laws of nature and the laws of science have been violated in order to produce an outcome, have been overcome. So when Jesus was, after the marriage, or before the marriage feast of Cana, I should say, Jesus called his disciples down along the seashore, and they were fishermen. Their fathers were fishermen. Their grandfathers were fishermen. That's all they ever knew. That's all they knew how to do, is to be fishermen. And they were taking care of their nets. And Jesus comes along and he says to them, Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. What did they do? They dropped their nets and they followed him. Now that wasn't a miracle because they didn't violate any acts or laws of nature, but simply by their own will, they obeyed God, and it was God who changed their mind. This was what I would call an act of God as opposed to a miracle. So now you've seen a piece of both of these terms, what a miracle is, what an act of God is. An act of God being where God works in our heart, or God works in the circumstances around us and brings to light something that is amazing and profound. No laws of nature were violated, but it certainly is nevertheless an amazing event that has taken place. Do you see the difference between the miracle and an act of God? We pray for miracles. We pray that the cancer cells present in a person's body will be arrested and that they will be able to live a normal life. We prayed last week for a professional football player whose heart stopped on the football field and he had to be resuscitated. And just a couple days ago, he was released from the hospital after this incredible thing. Was that a miracle or was that an act of God? I don't have the answer to that because I know there was a lot of medicine involved, but there was a lot of prayers that went up for this man. And I trust that God had this man's life in his hands and he spared them. I'm not sure how much difference it makes whether we call something a miracle or an act of God, because God is at work nevertheless and bringing about the results. Maybe laws of nature were broken, or maybe a person was healed naturally with the use of medicine. Either way, God was at work. Now I know that God is big enough to do either one of these, a miracle or a work of God. The question is, do we have enough faith to believe that it's possible? Go in God's peace.